Hello everyone and welcome back to Biology with Mrs. Evans. Today we are starting Unit 3, which is all about the cell membrane and membrane transport. This particular video is going to be looking at the cell membrane. So when we talk about the cell membrane, some of this is going to be a review because you had the opportunity to build some of these structures that we're going to talk about and you got to see the relationship to the cell membrane. So this is going to be a little bit of a review and some new information. So first, all cells, regardless of what type they are, have a cell membrane. So if it is an animal cell, it's going to have a cell membrane. If it's a plant cell, it's going to have a cell membrane. If it is a fungi, whatever, it's going to have a cell membrane. So from the simplest cell up to the most complex cell, all cells have a cell membrane. And that is because cell membranes serve basically two functions. One, obviously, it protects the cell from the external environment and also adds support to the cell. It helps give a little bit of structure to it. And then the main function of the cell membrane is to control what enters and leaves the cell. We're going to talk about how that works in a moment. But before we do, you might want to pause the video and jot down these other names for the cell membrane so that you know if you get a piece of literature on the plasma membrane, the lipid bilayer, or phospholipid, they're all talking about the cell membrane. Again, I apologize for all of the different terms that mean the same thing or refer to the same thing. So make sure you know the plasma membrane is the same as the cell membrane. Lipid bilayer or phospholipid bilayer, all referring to the cell membrane. And then again, make sure you know the functions. Protect the cell, provide structure to the cell, and then the main function to regulate or control what comes into and leaves the cell. So how does that work? We're going to talk about that in a second. Alright, so before we get into how the cell regulates what comes in and out, you need to know the term selectively permeable, or you also refer to it or see it referred to as semi-permeable. And what that means is that it's going to allow some substances to move through while keeping others out. So if you look at the picture here on the screen, you'll notice that the red circle here can move through easily because it's small enough to fit through this little pore, whereas this big pink circle cannot fit through because it's too big to move through. So selectively permeable keeps some things out while allowing other things to pass through it, and we're going to talk about how that works in a moment. So before we begin talking about the different components and how the cell membrane works, we need to talk about the fluid mosaic model. The fluid mosaic model is a model that scientists use to describe basically the cell membrane, and you need to know why it's called that. And basically scientists came up with that because if you know what a mosaic is, and my art people should know what that is, whether it's a plate that you broke and then you're going to use those little pieces to create another picture, or the one that you're probably most familiar with, which is this guy right here, all of these little specks that you see are little pictures, and let's say that for this particular one it's 1,000 different pictures. They're arranged so that it creates a new picture. Alright, so notice that the cell membrane over here is made up of lots of different pieces. That's why it's called mosaic. And then the reason why we call it fluid is because the cell membrane has some fluidity to it, meaning if you take a piece of paper, hold up your notebook paper, you can bend it. It's flexible. Alright, whereas your desk does not have fluidity, it is rigid. Alright, so we refer to the cell membrane as a fluid mosaic because it has the ability to be flexible and move, and that it is made up of many different pieces. So make sure you know what the fluid mosaic model is and why it's called that. Alright, so now let's look at the different pieces or different components of the cell membrane. Phospholipid, you had the opportunity to construct this molecule and read about this molecule when we did the hands-on activities for the different type of macromolecules. So this would be just a quick review. The phosphate remember, is the head region, and the head region is going to be the polar region. That's going to be the region that likes water, so we refer to that as hydrophilic, remember, water loving, or is attracted to water. And then the tail region, which is these guys right here, those are your lipids. And remember, lipids are nonpolar, which means they do not like water, they repel it, and we refer to that as hydrophobic. So remember, in biology, I talked about a major or a key idea is that form follows function, and that comes into play with the cell membrane. So let me advance to the next slide. So if you look at how the phospholipids are arranged, okay, that's what's going to allow it to be selectively permeable. First, notice that the hydrophilic portion of the cell membrane are oriented so that where it will come in contact with water is the hydrophilic portion of the phospholipid. So this would be, let's say, the external part of the cell where it could come in contact with water. And then this right here would be the internal side of the cell membrane, where again it could potentially come in contact with water because the cytoplasm, major component of that, is water. So notice the orientation. Second, we know it's a bilayer, so there are two layers of phospholipids, but the tails are oriented together. All right, so this is going to be the area that does not like water. So the function, all right, of the cell membrane is to control what enters and leaves, and it's related to its structure. So the phospholipids, if you notice here, there are these little spaces where a small particle, so like my little red circle that I showed you in the picture before this, those little small red circles can move through because they're small enough to go through those little spaces. Also, the other thing that you need to know is that those little particles that move through this region would have to be nonpolar. It means it cannot have a charge. So in order to go directly through the phospholipids, the particle would have to be small enough to fit through and then also have basically no charge. Because remember, if it has a charge, it's going to be repelled by this nonpolar piece. So if it's small enough and is non-polar, does not carry a charge, it can move directly through the phospholipid. Obviously, there are going to be times when the cell membrane might need to move through something that is bigger than the little spaces would allow or would have a charge. So there are ways to get those items in, and we're going to talk about those in a second. The second component of the cell membrane we talked about also when we talked about macromolecules are proteins. So for this class, you need to know there are two types of proteins. One is a channel protein, and as the name implies, there is this canal-like structure that would allow for these larger particles to move through this channel. Notice they're too big to move through the little spaces, but they are the right size to fit through that channel. The other type of protein is a carrier protein, and that's going to act like a gate. So if it wants to move this molecule through, it is going to basically attach to it and then escort it, if you will, through and allow it to enter into the cell membrane. So two types, channels and carrier, and you'll also see in some textbooks they'll talk about integral, which means that they are basically a protein that's embedded. So this would be an integral protein, and then peripheral proteins, which would be ones that are basically on the surface of the cell membrane. But for me, just know the two types, channel, carrier, but just keep in the back of your mind integral versus peripheral in case you see that in text. The third part of the cell membrane is the carbohydrate. Again, we talked about this when we talked about macromolecules. Notice that the prefix, and I add this to your notes in class. Remember, glyco, this prefix here, glyco, refers to a carbohydrate. And notice that the carbohydrate is named based on what it's attached to. So the carbohydrate, this guy right here, is attached to a protein. So this one's going to be called a glycoprotein. If it's attached directly to the phospholipid, like this one right here, notice it is called a glycolipid. All right, so carbohydrates, they act as an ID tag. Remember, it tells the cell that, hey, this cell belongs to this person. This is the job of the cell, and that is so that if you get a foreign bacterial cell that comes into your body sends off an alarm, intruder, intruder, hey, this doesn't belong, and it will trigger an immune response. And then also remember, we talked about carbohydrates can also act as a receptor so that medicines and things like that could bind to those areas, and the medicine could do the job that it needs to do. The next component is cholesterol. We did mention cholesterol when we talked about lipids. Remember, cholesterol is a lipid, and basically the job of cholesterol in the cell membrane is to add rigidity to the cell membrane. So what that means is it kind of acts like a glue. It helps hold that cell membrane together. So when you were a kid, you got to play with bubbles, or you've seen kids play with bubbles. You know, you blow them and you try to pop them, or they're easy to pop. But in lab, you're going to have the opportunity to play with bubbles that are going to be resistant to popping, and that is because of a structural component, and we're going to call that cholesterol. So you'll see how cholesterol would work in the cell membrane. So it adds rigidity, helps keep it together so it doesn't pop very easily. And then the last component that we're going to talk about, it's not actually part of the cell membrane, but we do talk about it now, and that is the cytoskeleton. And just as our skeleton provides basically support and structure for our bodies, that is the same way that the cytoskeleton does for the cell. And I'll advance it so you can see it. So remember, this is a picture of the cell membrane. The cytoskeleton would be all these little fibers that you see here. And it's basically a network of fibers that are going to support the cell. It's going to add some extra support to the cell membrane. So again, remember, just know it's not a physical piece or a component of the cell membrane, but it does basically add some support to the cell membrane, so it provides a little bit more structure to the cell itself. So we're going to end where we started. This is a picture of the cell membrane. You would need to be able to identify the different pieces. Again, major component of the cell membrane are these guys right here, which are your phospholipids. Remember, the little yellow circles would be the phosphate, and then these would be the tail. And then these guys, the little purple potatoes, what I like to call them, those are your proteins. Again, these are integral because they're embedded in, and then you'd have peripheral, which maybe would be a protein that would be like right here, and you'll see that on the handout that I'll give you in class. And then you need to know the two types. This one obviously is a channel protein, so it allows molecules to move directly through. You need to know what molecules can move through. So what goes through a protein? Large particles, or particles that have a charge, or maybe they're both. Maybe they're large and charged, so they're going to go directly through this protein. And then small uncharged particles that could fit through the little spaces in the phospholipid would move directly through the cell membrane. And then you have your carbohydrates, and they're going to be named for what they're attached to. So all of these that you see pictured here are attached to protein, so all of these would be glycoproteins. If there was one that was attached to, say, this phospholipid, there's a little chain right here, that would be a glycolipid. And again, they act as an ID tag or a receptor for medicines and things like that to bind to it. And then you don't see it here, but cholesterol would be a little molecule here that again adds rigidity to the cell membrane. It acts like a glue, helps keep everything together. So that's the cell membrane in a nutshell. We'll talk about other ways that the cell moves particles in and out, because there are going to be substances that are going to be even too big to move through the protein. So how do they get into the cell? And we're going to talk about that in the next couple of videos. Have a great day.